Jack was a lively and mischievous boy who lived with his family in a small cabin at the edge of the ville. From a youthful age, Jack had a wild imagination and a love for playing capriccios on those around him. As a shepherd boy, Jack spent his days watching over his flock of lamb on the hillsides that girdled the ville. Though he took his job seriously, he frequently set up himself wearied and looking for ways to entertain himself. One day, while watching over his lamb, Jack had an idea for knavery. He decided to roar, "Wolf," and pretend that a dangerous wolf was attacking his flock. He knew that the townies would come running to help, and he set up the idea of their response to be ridiculous. So, Jack cried, "Wolf," at the top of his lungs and awaited for the townies to arrive. Within twinkles, the townies rushed to his aid, but when they arrived, they discovered that there was no wolf and that Jack was only playing a trick on them. The townies were annoyed with Jack and told him that he shouldn't cry wolf unless there was peril. Jack just laughed it off and promised to be more careful in the future, but in reality, he was formally planning his coming knavery. As Jack grew aged, his love for playing capriccios only grew stronger. He'd frequently tell wild and inflated stories to his fellow townies just to see their responses. He loved the feeling of being the center of attention and the horse laugh and applause that followed his capriccios. But over time, the townies grew tired of Jack's capers. They no longer set up his jokes funny, and they began to question his honesty. They were no longer sure if they could trust him, and they started to ignore his cries for help, allowing that he was just playing another one of his capriccios. Despite this, Jack continued to play his capriccios and tell his wild stories, unconscious of the damage that he was doing. He did not realize that by lying and exaggerating, he was losing the trust and respect of those around him. One day, while watching over his flock, a wolf did appear and started to attack his lamb. Jack, alarmed and hopeless for help, cried out for the townies to come and deliver him. But this time, when the townies arrived, they didn't believe him. They allowed that he was just playing another one of his capriccios, and they left him to deal with the wolf on his own. As a result, the wolf killed several of his lambs, and Jack realized that he'd eventually learned his assignment. He knew that he'd been dishonest and that he'd lost the trust of his fellow townies. From that day on, he pledged to always be honest and no way cry wolf again. He worked hard to recapture the trust of his community, and in time, he was suitable to do so. Through his experience, Jack learned the significance of honesty and the consequences of not telling the verity. He realized that his love for playing capriccios had come at a great cost and that the trust and respect of his community were far more precious than any knavery or joke. Agitated at the prospect of playing yet another knavery on the townies, Jack decided to roar, "Wolf," one day, hoping that the townies would come running to his aid. He was sure that they would be wisecracked and that he'd have another ridiculous story to tell. So, Jack stood on a small hill and cried, "Wolf! Wolf! A dangerous wolf is attacking my flock." The townies heard his cries and ran to his aid, only to find Jack laughing and telling them that he'd just been playing knavery on them. The townies were irked and disappointed by Jack's gesture, but they decided to let it go. Jack repeated the knavery many further times over the coming many days, enjoying the attention and horse laugh that he entered. Still, the townies were getting more and more skeptical of Jack's cries for help. They began to wonder if he was telling the verity or just playing another knavery. As a result, when a real wolf did attack Jack's flock, and he cried out for help, the townies did not believe him. They allowed that he was just trying to trick them again, so they didn't come to his aid. In the end, Jack lost numerous of his lamb, and he learned a hard assignment about the significance of telling the verity. From that day on, Jack realized that his knavery had serious consequences. He saw that the trust and honesty he'd taken for granted were gone and that he'd let down his fellow townies. He understood that the damage he'd done was far more significant than any temporary recreation he'd entered from his capriccios. Jack learned that honesty and responsibility were essential traits that shouldn't be taken smoothly, and he worked hard to recapture the trust of his community. The townies were sacrificed when they heard Jack's cries for help. They incontinently dropped what they were doing and rushed to his aid, armed with pitchforks and other tools to scarify off the wolf. They ran up the hill towards Jack's flock, awaiting to find a fierce and dangerous wolf attacking his lamb. Still, when the townies arrived at the top of the hill, they said up that there was no wolf. Jack was laughing and holding a stick, pretending that it was a wolf. The townies were furious and disappointed by Jack's gesture, feeling that they had been wisecracked by his knavery. The townies scolded Jack and told him that he shouldn't play similar dangerous capriccios. They explained to him that it wasn't just a joke and that his conduct could have serious consequences. Jack, feeling shamed and embarrassed, apologized to the townies and promised that he'd no way play such knavery again. The townies forgave Jack, but they advised him that he'd have to earn their trust back. They couldn't take his word presently and would have to see that he was truly sorry and married, to be honest in the future. Jack realized that he'd lost the trust and respect of his community and that he'd have to work hard to recapture it. The incident tutored Jack an important assignment about the significance of honesty and trust. He understood that his knavery had far-reaching consequences and that it wasn't worth losing the trust of his fellow townies. From that day on, Jack made conscious trouble to be more honest and secure. He worked hard to recapture the trust of his community and became known as a responsible and dependable cowgirl. After Jack's knavery, the townies were irked and angry with him. They had been authentically concerned for his safety and that of his lamb, only to discover that he'd been playing a trick on them. They scolded him and advised him that crying wolf when there was no peril could have serious consequences. The townies explained to Jack that their time and energy were precious and that they couldn't go to waste them on false admonitions. They told him that if he cried wolf again when there was no peril, they would no longer believe him when a wolf was attacking his flock. They stressed that his jest could lead to a serious problem where no one would come to his aid when he demanded it. Jack realized the graveness of his conduct and the impact they could have on the townies. He apologized to them and promised no way to cry wolf again unless there was a peril. He knew that he had to recapture the trust and respect of his community and work hard to make amends for his mistake. From that day on, Jack made combined trouble, to be honest, and secure. He always assured that there was a real peril before crying wolf, and he took his liabilities as a cowgirl more seriously. The townies appreciated his sweats and sluggishly began to trust him again. Jack learned an important assignment about the value of honesty and the consequences of his conduct. He knew that he'd no way forget the townies' warnings and would always flash back to be veracious and responsible. Despite the townies' warnings, Jack continued to play capriccios on them and tell falsehoods. He set up it entertaining to see their responses and enjoyed the attention he entered. He'd frequently exaggerate the verity, telling wild and questionable stories just to get a response out of the townies. Still, over time, the townies began to catch on to Jack's jest. They no longer trusted him and had grown tired of his falsehoods and capriccios. They started to part themselves from him and would not help him when he demanded it, allowing that he was just playing another trick on them. One day, a wolf did attack Jack's flock, and he cried out for help. But when the townies heard his cries, they allowed it was just another knavery and didn't come to his aid. As a result, the wolf killed numerous of Jack's lambs, and he was left alone to deal with his fate. Feeling the weight of his conduct, Jack realized that he'd been foolish and that his jest had serious consequences. He eventually learned his assignment about the significance of honesty and the consequences of his conduct. He knew that he had to change his ways if he wanted to recapture the trust of his community and be taken seriously in the future. From that day on, Jack made real trouble, to be honest, and secure. He apologized to the townies for his once jest and worked hard to earn their trust back. He learned that lying and playing capriccios weren't worth the price he'd paid and that it was better to be veracious and responsible. With time, Jack was suitable to restore his character and come to a reputed member of the community. As the wolf attacks his flock, Jack cries out for help, but the townies don't believe him, assuming that he's playing another trick. As a result, the wolf manages to kill several of his lambs before Jack can fend it off on his own. After the wolf leaves, Jack realizes that he has made a terrible mistake and that his falsehoods and capriccios have led to this woeful event. Feeling shamefaced and shamed, Jack eventually learns the significance of telling the verity and being honest with others. He apologizes to the townies and pledges to no way play capriccios or tell falsehoods again. The townies forgive him but advise him that he has lost their trust and that it'll take time to recapture it. From that day forward, Jack becomes an honest and secure member of the community. He learns that honesty is always the stylish policy and that lying and dishonesty can have serious consequences. He realizes that his conduct has real-world consequences and that it's important to always suppose before speaking and to consider how his words and conduct will affect others. As the wolf attacks his flock and Jack cries out for help, he realizes that his once conduct has caused the townies not to believe him. He's left to face the wolf alone, knowing that it's his fault. This is a vital moment for Jack, as he experiences the consequences of his deceitfulness and the detriment it can beget. As he fights off the wolf, Jack reflects on his once jest and the hurt and harm it has caused. He realizes that his falsehoods and capriccios have real-world consequences and that he needs to change his ways. By facing the wolf alone, Jack learns the significance of taking responsibility for his conduct and being honest with others. He learns that trust is a commodity that must be earned and that it's much harder to recapture once it has been lost. Despite the peril, Jack manages to fend off the wolf and save the remainder of his flock. He understands that the wolf could have been averted from causing similar destruction had he not prevaricated about the former pitfalls. This experience leaves a deep impact on Jack, and he begins to take a way to come to a further honest and secure person. With the peril over, Jack feels guilt and understands that his falsehoods have consequences. He sees that his conduct has caused him to lose the trust of the townies, and he feels shamefaced for putting his lamb and himself in peril. He realizes the significance of honesty and the consequences of his once conduct. Jack takes responsibility for his once jest and decides to make amends. He apologizes to the townies and pledges to be honest in the future. He works hard to recapture their trust and starts to rebuild his character by being veracious. Over time, the townies begin to see that Jack has truly changed and he regains their respect. They start to trust him again and his lamb business starts to thrive formerly more. Jack learns that honesty is the foundation of trust and that trust is essential for maintaining healthy connections with others. The story ends with Jack having learned his assignment and he becomes a secure member of the community. The townies are happy to have him back, and he's thankful for the alternate chance they've given him. He lives the rest of his life as an honest and dependable cowgirl, no way forgetting the assignments he learned from his once miscalculations. Jack is ashamed of his once jest and the consequences of his deceitfulness. He realizes that he has lost the trust of his fellow townies and that his conduct has led to his downfall. He reflects on the warning he entered from the townies and understands the significance of honesty. He decides to go to the Ville and apologize for his conduct. When Jack arrives, he finds that the townies are still angry with him and don't want to hear his reason. Still, Jack persists and explains how sorry he's for his jest. He acknowledges that he was wrong to deceive them and promises to be honest from that day forward. Gradationally, the townies begin to see that Jack is sincere in his reason and that he has truly learned his assignment. They begin to forgive him and offer their support as he tries to make amends for his once jest. Over time, Jack can rebuild his character and the trust of the townies. Through this experience, Jack learns the significance of honesty and the consequences of his conduct. He understands that being veracious isn't only important for erecting trust and connections with others, but is also important for his particular growth and well-being. He commits to always be honest and no way deceive others again.